and just for anyone, because you also have your income and everything else you need to protect. So what is insurance? Basically, and I'm just going to give you the definition here, insurance is, for a fee, you're putting the risk on the insurance company instead of taking that risk yourself. So, you know, if you have a car accident, the insurance company is going to pay for it. You're not going to have to pay for that accident out of your own pocket. And that's what insurance is. So you're just transferring any potential risk that you may have onto an insurance company in exchange for a fee. So this is the question that most people should ask. They don't always ask, but they should ask. And that's, you know, how much insurance do I need? And really, that's not a simple answer. Every single person is going to need a different amount of insurance depending on what their personal situation and family situation is. You have to look at what assets you have. If someone was to sue you tomorrow, what could they come after? What do you own? And, you know, you want to look at your home, you want to look at your savings account, you want to look at retirement. You need to look at your current income and your future income, because they can actually go after that income. Retirement, and if you have a business, you know, can they come after assets in that business? And then what would what would happen to your lifestyle if suddenly, you know, you had a huge lien over you that you had to pay because there was a loss? Personal injury attorneys. If you ever wonder what they, you know, how they make their living, go on their websites. You can look under, they'll tell you about their most recent cases and how much money they got. There's some really large cases out there for very minor things. It could be a minor car accident. It could be somebody went to work at one of your homes and they got injured, and they sued you for workers' comp, or they just sued you because they were injured, even if they got workers' comp through their employer. So there's all types of areas that you can be exposed, and insurance is there to close that gap and prevent you from being exposed. But look at their websites. They all have, you know, recent cases that you can look at. And the last thing you want to be is the target of an asset search, because they're going to look up and see what you own. And that's going to make their decision if they're going to represent this other person, because usually they don't go on retainer. They usually take a percentage. So they're going to look and see, what do you own? I'm going to give you some sample verdicts. So these are real cases. You know, we had a 4-year-old girl that was looking for a ball. That was $800,000. A homeowner's railing on their balcony gave way and a guest fell to the ground below. That was $880,000. A motorist failed to stop at a crosswalk and struck a pedestrian. That was $930,000. And then we had a golden retriever that knocked down somebody, a little girl. And then a driver hit a garbage truck, and the garbage man riding on the back of the truck was slightly injured when jumping off. And he was not hit, but you know, he hurt his ankle. And that was the verdict. That was the jury verdict. So amazing things that you would be shocked at. So how do you protect yourself? So really the first thing you need to do is you need to look at what you're worth and look at all these different assets that you have. Look at your primary home. Look at all your rental properties. And again, you want to look at, you know, what you have invested in it, what your equity is in there. Any savings, stocks, bonds, and then again, your income. because your wages can be garnished. If you lose a case in court, you can have your wages garnished for years. So you want to make sure that you're taking that into consideration as well. And then retirement accounts, even though they're safe, they can't really touch them. If you have a 401k, they view it that you can borrow against that. So they may consider that. So even though they can't take that away from you, it could be a consideration in what you might have to pay. So the key thing you want to start doing is you want to start looking at what you have to determine how much insurance you should have. And think about that number. All of you think in your head, you know, how much insurance? I mean, what is my net worth? And based on my net worth, do I have sufficient insurance to cover that plus? Because you always want to have more insurance than your net worth. Because you want to make sure that they go after the insurance company. Because that is money that they know they can get. They don't know how much they're going to get out of you. And so you want to make sure that there's sufficient money over there that there's just no question. So we're going to talk about auto liability bodily injury limits and what that means. We're going to talk about property damage limits. Uninsured motorist, home liability is another part of the insurance we'll talk about. Landlord liability. We're going to also talk about policies, and I have some deck pages that we're going to look at, and I'm going to show you how to read your deck pages. And then again, business liability. And we'll go over each of these individually. Okay. So I'm going to take a car policy, and I don't know, can you see this very well? Or should I pass them out? Because I had trouble with getting it to...
Let's see if we can...
I don't know if you can get it much better, because it's just not great. Just pass these out and share if you wouldn't mind. Because what we're going to do, let's see it a little bit.
Okay, I'll do that.
But anyway, please share that, and I did pass these out so that it's a copy of it. So right here is this particular one. You probably can't see it, but it says 500, 500, 100. And these are your bodily injury limits, okay? What that means is if you're in a car accident and you injure the person you hit, you will have $500,000 per accident and $500,000 per person. So this is the per person limit. This is each accident. Some people will have the minimum, the state minimum requirement is $15,000, 30. So $15,000 right here, $30,000 here. That's the state minimum. $5,000 in property damage. I don't know too many cars. I mean, hopefully you don't do a lot of damage to a car, but $5,000 is going to go really quick on third-party liability. And $15,000, if you put somebody in the hospital, that's going to cover the emergency room. Okay, so anything over and above that, the insurance company is going to say, sorry, you don't have the coverage, and they can come after you for that money. They can personally sue you for that loss. So you always want to make sure that you have sufficient coverage in that area. And in this case, it's 500, 500, which is a decent amount of coverage. And we're going to go into what you can do on top of that in a little bit. But this is just your base policy. And in this case, there's $100,000 in property damage. So this particular person has really nice coverage. They have a good solid policy. And then in the second line, this is your uninsured motorist. And what that means is that if I'm driving down the road and somebody hits me and they don't have insurance and I'm in the hospital and I can't work for 6 months and I have properties and I have things that I have to pay and I have to live and I have family to support, how am I going to do that? I might have medical insurance and that kind of thing, and maybe I have some long-term disability, but I might have a 90-day waiting period. That money actually your insurance company will pay you for your bodily injury if an uninsured motorist hits you. And so a lot of people buy very little coverage here. They might have good coverage for somebody else that they hit, but they'll have very low coverage for themselves. They might have 15, 30 for themselves because they view that as an optional coverage, and they're not as worried about themselves. But the reality is that it's very inexpensive. In this case, it's $60 every 6 months, and that's a protection for you and your family should they be hit by an uninsured motorist. That's money that would come to you. And I actually had a situation in my book of business where that was paid out. A teenage girl was driving with another teenager, and the teenager had let her insurance lapse, and my client was severely injured, and we paid out to the full benefits of the policy. And that was important. Yes?
What about regular medical insurance? Isn't that
We're going to get to
covered?
that, but this is bodily injury. So this is covering even your lost income. It's not just to cover your medical expenses. Because if, for instance, if you're in an accident, bodily injury, not only can they sue you for their medical expenses, they can sue you for lost income, anything else that, any other expenditures that they incur because they had that accident. So it's not just to cover medical. The next line is your medical. In this case, they have $5,000. Now this $5,000 is no questions asked, and it's for your family. It's for the people in your vehicle and your family. And what that means, and a lot of people do get this, and I do recommend that you get at least 1,000, maybe 5,000. Most of us, even if we have medical, we do have deductibles. We also have certain things that maybe aren't covered. For instance, chiropractic. A lot of insurances do not cover chiropractic. What do you like to have done a lot of times after you've had an accident? You might want to go see a chiropractor because maybe your neck is bothering you. You have that money there for that. They're not going to be a Blue Cross or Blue Shield that says, I'm sorry, you only get 16 visits, and this is all you have. You have up to $5,000. So that's a great coverage to have. So again, you want to know what yours are. And then the next, so here we have two vehicles. You have vehicle 1 and vehicle 2. In this particular case, vehicle 1 is an older vehicle, so they chose not to have any comprehensive or collision coverage. What that means is that they're insured for third-party liability, but they did not insure their own vehicle. So if they have an accident and their vehicle is damaged, they're going to have to pay the cost for that. If it's totaled, the car's gone. Whatever salvage value they get, that's about all they're going to get for it. So they're taking on that expense themselves. That's their car. I think both of these have a $1,000 deductible, and that applies to vehicle 2, which is, I can't really even see what it is, a GMC something. I think it's a truck. And so in this particular case, they chose a $1,000 deductible. Let me explain the difference between comprehensive and collision. Comprehensive coverage covers things like my car's in the parking lot and somebody comes and keys the car. The car was not moving, it wasn't hit by another car, or the car is stolen, or a rock hits my windshield and it cracks my windshield. Those are comprehensive claims. A collision claim is somebody was in a vehicle, either somebody else's vehicle hit mine while they were in the vehicle, or I'm driving my vehicle and I hit something else. Another comprehensive claim is, they call it under collision, but they apply the comprehensive deductible as if you hit an animal. That's not a fault accident, so that's considered a comprehensive, and comprehensive claims do not go on your record. Only collision claims do. So that counts as an accident. And to count as an accident, it has to be over $750,000 in damage. $750 in damage. $750 in damage. Okay? If it's under $750, it doesn't even count as an accident. Okay? Any questions on that? Okay. Okay, so the minimum coverage I recommend, and especially for people who have rental properties, I recommend that you have a minimum of 250, 500, and I'm gonna explain a little later why. But this is, the minimum coverage. If you have property, you should have this. Used to be, if you owned your house, 100, 300, but that was probably 30 years ago. Now, with the way money is today, 250, 500 is, you should have that. It really doesn't cost that much more. I had a client that had the 100, 300, and I told him to get the 250, 500, and we priced it, and it was like an extra $20. And she's like, "What, that's all?" It's not that much more, so it's well worth it. And then the property damage, there are so many Mercedes and BMWs and Volvos around. 100,000 is not too much to have in property damage. And then the uninsured motorist, again, like I explained earlier, I recommend that you have the same that you're going to insure somebody else for. And medical at 5,000, and then home. We'll get into home, but again, I recommend a minimum of 300,000 on your home liability, and I'll explain that a little bit more as well. And then the reason I say all of that is because you should think about having an umbrella, and I'll explain what an umbrella is. But an umbrella goes over and above these other coverages, and these are the minimum coverages you can have in order to even purchase an umbrella. So that's why these coverages are so important, because if you're going down the path of needing an umbrella, you want to make sure that your underlying coverages are there and ready. And what makes the cost an average of 400 to 500 is the umbrella, because the umbrella is about, if you have one home and 2 cars with 2 drivers, the umbrella's probably $250 a year. But every time, the more properties you add, each property is additional $25 per year. If you have additional drivers or you have a 3rd car, that's going to bring that premium up. So I find with investors, it averages between 400 and 500 a year, because a lot of the people that I work with have 10, 12 homes that they have scheduled on their umbrellas.
This is assuming that all of your policies are through the same company?
They do not have to be through the same company. They do not. And I'll explain that a little bit later. Some companies will not let you purchase without being through their company, but there are companies out there that you can buy that you don't have to have them through the same company. Okay? Different companies have different rules, so you just have to find those right carriers. So let's talk about homeowners insurance. So you have dwelling replacement costs. So in this area, actually this area is probably a little bit even more than my area, because I live in the San Ramon Valley, but $200 a square foot is the minimum that I would even insure a home for, okay? And that's because we have extended replacement on top of that. But I'm saying that's like the lowest you should go.
I'm sorry, before you get into that,
Uh-huh.
could you go back to the other, because I'm
Sure.
getting a little confused. You
Uh-huh.
were talking about auto insurance. All of this is not under an auto insurance policy. Some is and some is not,
Right.
correct?
Okay, so you have your bodily injury limit. What I'm trying to show you is what I would recommend in your portfolio
Okay.
for all of your insurance. And the reason we're doing that is because we're going to lead into what an umbrella is and why that's important. So, yes, your minimum for auto should be $250, $500, with a minimum property damage $100, and the uninsured motorist and BI $500 with the medical. And I kind of went over why I thought those were important. And then in addition, which we'll go into more later, is your home liability should be $300,000, and then we'll talk about why an umbrella is so important as well.
Okay, so everything from medical on up is auto, and then you're gonna talk about the rest?
Right,
Okay.
right, yeah. Sorry.
So the landlord liability is different from the home insurance that you're gonna be talking about,
Yes,
right?
and we're gonna talk about landlord liability in a little bit. Okay, so now we're gonna talk about homeowner insurance. So this is my primary home. Okay, this is where I live. Okay, now, some of you may rent, and you may not be concerned about the dwelling, but you still should be concerned about some of these protections, okay? So you have your dwelling replacement, so you wanna make sure you have at least a minimum amount for your area. And if you're not quite sure, talk to a contractor. Say, you know what, if I were to build a house, and, let's say it's standard construction, how much is that? If I have a custom home, what do you charge a square foot? What's the average rate in this area? And that way you'll know, because the last thing you want to have happen is for your house to burn down and you not be able to rebuild it as it was. So you want to make sure that you have sufficient coverage per square foot. Sometimes though, it's not going to cost quite as much as a contractor might tell you. And the reason it may not is because there's two things. Number one, you're not going to lose your foundation if your house burns to the ground. You're going to still have that. And the permits are there for the house as it was built. So you still have some permitting costs, but it's not as expensive as when you're getting new, for a new building versus a replacement building. So there's going to be some cost reduction there, but there could be additional costs, such building ordinance changes, and you want to make sure that there is coverage in your policy for that, because if you have an older home and the laws have changed, the building codes have changed, that may cost you extra money. And so I'm going to show you a policy and how to read that as well on a home, and a landlord policy is very, very similar in how to read it as well. The other, you want to make sure you have loss of use, because if your house burns down, you're still going to have to make that mortgage payment on that house. So you want to make sure you have sufficient coverage to go live someplace else in a house of equal value to yours for at least a minimum of 12 months. Some companies even offer you up to 24 months. Because depending on your area and how many homes burnt, if it's a firestorm and you had 500 homes lost at the same time, it may take you more than a year by the time trying to get those contractors. And then the other thing that's important is that extended coverage, because again, if you're in an area that 500 homes burn at the same time, what's going to happen? The cost of rebuilding is suddenly going to go up because you've got 500 homes wanting to be built at the same time, and you may have limited resources and limited contractors in that area. So you may have to pay more. So you want that extended coverage in there. And we'll talk a little bit more about that too. The liability protection that exists on your home exists worldwide, so if you're traveling, it covers you wherever you go. It covers you as an individual and all the family members listed on that policy. And then you also should think about if you need floaters for maybe artwork, jewelry. I have somebody who has a gun collection, stamps, baseball cards, coins, anything unusual. Those things all have limits in your policy. Computers, for instance, you got 10,000, okay? So if you have a lot of extra computers, you have to look at maybe increasing that coverage. So you want to think about, and jewelry is very limited. It's usually $5,000 on most policies, and it's usually not more than $1,000 to $1,500 per piece. So if you have a lot of jewelry, you have to think about that if you want to protect that. So we're going to pass out a home. Next page two, because they're hard to read. Hopefully I have. Oops. Spread it out here. So let's talk a little bit about this. So typically you'll find the company information. A lot of people, I'll say, I need a copy of your declarations page, and they go, what's that? So this is a copy of a declarations page, and it usually says declaration right in the right-hand corner. And usually it has the policy number and, the term, the to and from date. In this section right here, and they're pretty standardized. I mean, most declaration, we call them deck pages. Most of them that you look at are going to look pretty much the same. The dwelling amount's usually going to be here. So in this particular case, this house has $556,000. And then next to it, is I think it's separate structures, I have to go by memory. And so that's usually 10% of the dwelling. And separate structures are things like my fencing, if you have a storage shed, or any separate item on your property. And then this is personal property. And most people will say, oh, that's way too much, I don't need that much. If your house burnt to the ground and you had to replace absolutely everything in it, from your toothbrush to every shoe, to every piece of clothing, to every dish, pot and pan, you would be surprised how quickly that will add up.
Which insurance covers for the car burning down in the garage?
Your car insurance.
Car insurance?
Your car insurance. So if you only have liability only, you're not gonna, your car's gone. It doesn't, it's not in your car, your home insurance. So this property insurance, different companies use a different formula, but it's usually a percentage of whatever the dwelling is. So the higher the dwelling, the more personal property.
So separate structure will include swimming pool and pool shed and
It could, yes, the pool yes. And if you need more cost, like for instance, in this one, I have a gentleman that actually has a barn, and that barn, he converted it to a big, it's got a little kitchen in it, and a TV room, and all of that. So he actually added additional coverage in those separate structures for something like that. Some people have a little casitas, for maybe the in-law, or for guests. You wanna make sure that needs to be adjusted, because that's gonna, on a standard policy, it's gonna be 10% of whatever the dwelling is. So if there's something different on your property, you need to make sure you have that in there.
But I understand if you have the mother-in-law room in the back, if it's a separate structure, these policies will not cover that back structure since it's a separate living unit. You actually carry two policies.
No, that's not true, not if it, depends on the carrier.
Farmers,
No.
I've had them twice in the past 10 years. I've got 2 units on one lot. They will
Okay,
not.
but do they have a separate address?
Yes.
That's why.
2 different titles.
Separate,
same-
no,
same
no, but it's a separate
Oh,
address,
oh.
but it is a separate address. That's the differentiation. But if you have, like my guy has this, it's a barn that they converted, and it actually could be an apartment. And I actually worked with the underwriter and worked with claims to make sure that we had the right coverage, and we did do it under separate structures, because it's not a separate address.
It's not, okay.
But if you have like unit A and B, and like if you have a legal apartment or it's considered a duplex or whatever, then you do have to, but you can make it a duplex and have two children.
If it was attached,
If it was attached,
I'd be
yeah.
covered. But I have there are 2 houses, 2 separate addresses, zoned
So that's
R2,
why,
all of that.
because it's
Okay.
2 separate addresses.
What if the in-law unit is not permitted, which is happens?
It'll get rebuilt for what the city knows
Yeah,
and
I'm
thinks is
not
there.
sure that would be covered necessarily. Yeah, because, I don't believe it. I would have to, that would be one that I would have to research and talk to underwriting and claims to verify whether that would be covered or not. But I would assume not. You could probably get a separate policy for something like that. Is it like a,
No, I don't have one of those, but
Okay.
every second house that I looked at in San Jose had it.
okay.
I call them
So-
mushrooms, all of
Yeah,
a sudden
yeah.
something
Or
grew in the
Winchester Mystery
backyard.
House.
Yeah,
What if it's part of the same structure, but it's separate addresses? And it's listed as a single-family residence, but it's rented out full-time?
I would definitely look at getting that at least listed as a duplex if it's attached.
Listed insurance-wise, but not county
Insurance-wise.
tax-wise?
You're gonna have some issues with that because it's not with the county, but you definitely, from an insurance perspective, you definitely wanna list it as a duplex. And I would probably, again, have to check with our underwriting group just to make sure that that would not be an issue. But, because it's different than the county records. But you definitely want to make sure you have the right coverage there. And especially if you have it rented out, so
Yeah.
it can be an issue.
an acquaintance I know had like a colonial-style house, single-family house, 2-story, on the weekend, they turned it into an upstairs unit, downstairs unit. And their insurance carrier told them, well, it'll get rebuilt as the original single-family house. If you put in an extra kitchen in over the weekend, the insurance doesn't cover the weekend work, but, you know, the structure, so if the square footage is there, that's gonna get redone.
And then the next, trying to see what that is, loss of use. So loss of use, farmers actually gives you 24 months. So you can see that's actually a pretty generous dollar amount. If you were to divide that by 24 months, that could potentially be what you would have available to you to go rent someplace else. So that's a pretty good amount. And then in this particular case, they have $1 million liability policy on their home. And then the medical is usually just a small amount, that's $1,000. So, and then we have extended replacement as well, which I believe is that line
Yes.
Right.
there. And so if you take the 556 plus the 376, that's actually how much this house is insured for.
What's the medical cover?
I don't remember. I think it's around 3,600 square feet. And this is in a really nice area, so it's more of a custom style home. So,
That makes it about 140 a square foot.
no.
On the 500 coverage, 3,500 square feet into 500.
I know this one has good solid coverage. I just don't remember the square footage of the house.
You said, for example, in this area to rebuild the house is $200.
I always do 200. I mean, that's my minimum that I would do,
So I always thought is that you take the square footage multiplied by
200.
So is this gonna be enough?
Well, that should be, I'm sure that one is. I actually think this one, maybe I'm trying to remember which house this is. I think that it's
2,500
probably
square
more like 250 a square foot.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it probably is, because I wouldn't do 200 a square foot in this neighborhood.
What about the 80%, when you have 80% coverage of the total replacement cost? Do you do that?
And you know, a lot of companies aren't looking at that anymore. They used to look at that, the old rule, and they changed this rule. The old rule was if you had it insured for 80% of the replacement, they would guarantee replacement. I don't know of any companies that guarantee replacement anymore. Ever since the Oakland fires, when nicer houses got built that were originally there, they decided that they had to put a limit. And so now what actually happens is every house that we do has to go through a rebuilding cost estimator. So we have to put in the square footage, the quality grade of the house, how many fireplaces, how many bathrooms, do they have granite, does it have stainless steel? We have to put all that in. And it actually tells us, based on the zip code, how much it believes that house will cost to rebuild. And we're required to actually insure it for that at least, or more. But we can't go under that number.
Is it only in the state of California or it's throughout the country?
I don't know about the other states. I know that that's the case here. I know that that's our company policy. And so if you were to buy a farmer's policy in another state, they would be using the same system that we use here in California.
Safe person to ask them, that's your lender, because the banks are getting pretty homogeneous across the country for
Well, the banks
Insurance
will also require you to have a certain amount, but the banks actually will want you to cover the loan. Is what they're looking for. They say, oh, but the loan is for this, but the loan includes land as well. It doesn't just include the home. And you know, it used to be a problem because the values of homes were so high and the cost to rebuild was actually much less. But now we have the opposite problem. I'm actually seeing homes selling for much less, and then when I go to put the insurance in, they're going, but I only paid $150,000 for this house, and you're insuring it for $275,000. But that's what it would cost to rebuild that house. So, and so I have to insure it for that. And then I can't read this. So you've got 10% building ordinance, and then the 30,000.
Identity
fraud
Identity
coverage.
fraud, okay. So that's just an added feature that Farmers has, that they actually cover you for that. And then, we
Personal
also,
injury.
pardon?
Sorry, this is something else.
And then we also have, your deductible down here, which this particular gentleman has $5,000 deductible. And then, a lot of times you wanna make sure that you have personal injury coverage on your policy, under your liability. So there's some things there too that you look at.
Personal identity fraud, if you don't want it, does the policy price go down?
No, it's just a part of our package. A lot of companies charge you extra for that. With farmers, it just comes as part of the package. So even if I were to take it off, it wouldn't save you anything, so it just comes there.
When you tell them their $5,000 deductible, it says to each covered loss. That means it's a $5,000 for every one of those boxes?
No,
Or
no, for each
anything that happens? One.
loss. So I have a fire,
Right.
I have a $5,000 deductible, okay? 3 months before the fire, I had a theft. I had a $5,000 deductible. So the high deductibles aren't great when you know, if you wanna file a claim on a theft, because, you know, if you have 20,000 stolen, and you got a $5,000 deductible, that'll hurt. But the 5,000 really doesn't hurt in rebuilding the house, because you can pretty much absorb that, so,
Uh,
okay?
What does personal liability cover if it's not the medical payments?
Personal liability covers a wide variety of things. I'm going to give you an example. So you have children, and your children bring their friends over, and the neighbor kid falls, they're playing on the swing in the backyard, and he falls and breaks a tooth, and he has to go in and have some work done, and the parent says, hey, that's your fault because you had these boards and they were hazardous, and I think, you know, and you will have $1,000 medical, okay? But let's say it's much more than that, and they decide to sue you. That's where your liability comes in. Let's say you're, trying to think of some good examples. There's a variety of examples. It's anything you could go do. You could be playing basketball at the local park, and somebody gets injured because you're playing basketball and you're going with the ball, and somebody falls down, they said it was your fault, and they blame you, and they turn around and sue you. You actually will be defended under your home policy personal liability. And the beauty about liability is that if you're sued and it's covered under your policy, Farmers actually takes over the lawsuit and hires their own attorneys to represent you. So you're not really involved in it at all. You basically are there to be interviewed or to testify, but they'll actually absorb those costs, and it doesn't even reduce that $1 million.
So in the case where you gave the example of the dental claim,
Mm-hmm.
let's say you got 1,000 covered and they sue you for 10,000 in medical expenses.
Right.
Now, you would take over the case, but if it was not punitive damages or any other type, it was just 9,000 additional medical, would you guys cover it, or would you come back to us because it's medical costs?
Oh, no. It would probably be covered if they agreed to it, and I'm not a claims person, but yes, they would pay that out, and that would be under your liability. Because your medical is only $1,000. That's a no questions asked. But chances are, if they're not satisfied with $1,000, they're going to ask for more than that. And so, if they take the $1,000, they can't come back and ask for more, so they have to sue you. They have to file an actual suit. So, but you can have a situation where somebody doesn't have medical insurance, and they want you to cover that. So, a dog bite, if you have a dog, that's another area that would be covered under your personal liability. Okay, so those are just some examples. So here's one, I'm using the basketball court. So, this is, and again, somebody who's didn't have insurance, got injured, blames you, said you were playing too rough, you tripped me, I'm hurt, I can't work, so they come after you, they don't have insurance, they've got a lot of bills. It's a good way to, and there's a good chance that they will file a suit for something like that. I'm amazed So now we're gonna talk about landlord protector policies. Okay, so here's a couple things you need to look at. It's very similar to that deck page that you looked at, okay? But different companies offer different things. In insurance, we talk about dwelling policy 1s and dwelling policy 3s. A dwelling policy 1 is named perils, and it doesn't usually include extended replacement. Okay, so a named peril would be you're covered for fire. Maybe you're covered for wind and hail. I guess maybe some snow, but you're not covered for theft, you're not covered for vandalism, you're not covered for falling objects. There's going to be certain things you're covered for and certain things you're not. So you want to know and read, what are you covered for? What are the named perils? A 3 is more broad form, so you're going to be covered for all the normal perils. I think there's 14 of them. So you'd be covered for the 14 perils, and don't ask me to name them, I had to memorize them, but I I don't remember them
You
all
passed
right
the
off the
test
top of
and
my
forgot
head. So, but you're going to be covered for all of them. So again, a DP1 is going to be cheaper than a DP3 because you're covered for less things. Okay? So you have to look at that, because I get people that'll say, well, your landlord protector policy costs $300 more. Well, I cover a lot more too. I'm not giving you a DP1.
Related to what? I've always carried the landlord protectors plus,
Mm-hmm.
you know, because I'm in business, so I wanted the coverage, but I'm curious, what are, you know, because I'm in,
A DP1 is basically going to cover for fire. It's really a basic fire policy, is really what a DP1 is.
not
And-
much in the way of liability coverage.
You have to
from
add it on.
tenant
Those are going to be
actions.
those are going to be added costs. And you have to add them on as individual extra coverages because it doesn't come with the policy. So on a landlord protector policy like we offer, and we offer the others too, but I don't typically recommend them. And because I have to add in all these extra coverages to make sure that they're covered, and by the time I do that, it's almost the same price. So what I do is that I do the landlord policy, which is already designed for a landlord. You're going to have loss of rents. So if your building burns down or it's flooded or something happens that it's not occupiable for a while, you still have to make that mortgage payment, but your tenants can't live there. It's not a place that they can live. You want to have loss of rents. Most of your lenders are going to make sure that you have at least 6 months. Most of the policies give you 12 months, and you should look at having 12 months. So you want to look at that. The other thing you want to make sure that you have coverage for under your liability is wrongful eviction. So you want to make sure that's included in there. Many a times your property management company will also want to be added as an additional insured on here as well. So, and then your liability covers you for things that could happen, because there could be visitors of your tenants. Maybe your tenants have a dog that you didn't give them permission to have, but that dog bites somebody and they sue you because you're the homeowner. Those are the kinds of things that are going to be covered under that general liability policy on your homeowners, okay?
What's wrongful eviction?
You evict somebody because they're not paying the rent, but they turn around and sue you and say that you were prejudiced against them and that you wrongfully evicted them, you didn't go through the proper steps, that kind of thing. Okay?
But tenants damages,
Tenants' damages are not covered because you gave that person permission to be in that house. So they're paying rent to you.
so is there an insurance for it or not? Because I keep hearing, I have other people that told me not only that it's covered, they actually use it against their insurance.
I have with farmers
Okay,
here in Sunnyvale.
here's where it would be covered. So the tenants cause a fire, okay, something like that. But as far as
Let's say the tenant
maintenance,
trashes your house, you know, tear down, take the
Kicked
drywall out.
in doors, holes in the
Yeah,
drywall.
not just gonna, I'm not gonna wear it.
you know what,
seriously
I
damaged.
think I would look at it in extreme. I'm surprised that you got it covered, because I actually had a situation where somebody called me on that, and we did file a claim and it was denied. So,
Now, it'd be interesting, what time frame, because now my claim was 3.5, 4 years ago.
this was probably about then. It was probably about 3 years ago. And but it depends, I think it depends on the extent. You know, when you say it depends on what trashed is. And I think it depends on the extent. I mean, stealing appliances, taking out, again, I think each claim adjuster would look at it individually, but typically, it's not covered because you've given that permission for that person to be in there. So it depends on how the claims viewed it and what your specific contract says, but it would not be my place. I would warn you that it may not be covered. But that doesn't mean that a claims adjuster wouldn't look at your in particular situation and maybe make a different determination. But I'm not a claims adjuster, so it would not be up to me to make that
Yeah.
determination.
When does vandalism coverage come into effect?
Vandalism coverage comes into effect when it's somebody unknown that causes the damage. But I have to warn you about one thing. If your house is vacant for more than 30 days and you have vandalism, they're not going to cover you because the house was vacant. So you have to be careful about that. There is insurance for vacant properties. And we know that when you have landlord policies, there's going to be periods of time when the house is vacant. So again, they will look at it. So you have to keep that in mind, that vandalism may go away if that property is vacant over a certain period of time.
I actually have damage from a tenant and did have a claim coverage, but they slipped into the vandalism category. So I think that's probably the trick that might be the nuance there.
Right.
If it can be filed as a vandalism claim, then it's covered or not.
Right. And I think that could be it, because if you say, my tenant trashed my house, probably not gonna be covered, but if you say, my house got trashed, and my tenant moved out, and it was just empty for a week, and so it gets,
No, I told him it was tenant, But also the thing that a lot of people miss, and just making a point on the empty for 30 days. If it's your own personal residence and you're gone for 30 days because you have it listed for sale, it's the same thing still applies. If the house,
Yes,
a
yes.
house is empty.
yes.
And
That's
so many people miss
Yeah.
that little memo.
And so keep that in mind. It doesn't, it's not just keep it in mind that that's a possibility and that you're taking that risk. I'm not recommending that you turn around and get a vacant property and then turn around and make it, 2 months later. That would be very difficult to be switching back and forth. But if I have a situation where I know the house, they're gonna keep it vacant for a long time. They're gonna keep it vacant for a year. Okay, then in that particular case, you want to maybe look at doing a different type of policy.
Do you know if it covers mold?
Mold is typically excluded, and if it is included, it will be a very, very limited dollar amount. And the reason being is mold is viewed as a maintenance item. They view that more as maintenance because it's a slow leak to create that mold. Where I have seen mold covered, though, is if you have a covered loss, such as a fire or a sudden burst of water, and it doesn't get, you do your best to take care of it, but maybe the insurance company's delayed in getting Service Master or someone out there, and mold can start to grow right away, they would cover it in that case. But let's say you had a very slow leak from, a pipe from upstairs that leaked down, and you didn't know it was there, and it was there for maybe 6 months or a year, and it created mold. That's viewed as a maintenance item, even though you couldn't see it.
So what if your tenant sued you for, let's say, lung issue?
Well, your liability policy would kick in.
Oh, it would?
Your liability policy would kick in, but they wouldn't cover the mold repair.
Okay. Yeah, I'm worried more about the health though. That might be unlimited.
And just understand that as long as you do your due diligence and you do your best to take care of an issue right away, like if they didn't inform you and they didn't have, and you had no idea, you can't be held accountable for something that you weren't given notice. But once you're given notice, you are required to at least take immediate response. And if you do that, your insurance company's gonna be there for you. They're gonna help you with that. Because you did everything you could.
So
To remedy the problem.
If they say there is mold, and then your repair guy come in and say, there's no mold, they just leak.
have a there are companies out there that you can have certified that there's no mold.
Okay.
You can, and maybe that's better than just having a general contractor or somebody. There are companies out there that will come out and give you a certification. You know, and one is like a Service Master. There's some different companies out there that they specialize in that. You have to pay for that. But they will do that. Okay, so let's talk about an umbrella. Okay, so we've talked a lot about liability, and both from auto and a home standpoint. So what does an umbrella do? That goes over and above that underlying policy, and it can give you anywhere from $1 million to $5 million, over and above. So let's say you had what this gentleman had, which was $1 million on his home. So you add $1 million on the umbrella, he has a total coverage of $2 million on his home. So you have a copy of the deck page in front of you. You can see that this particular gentleman had $1 million. So you add the underlying policy with the umbrella, and that's your total coverage. Should you have a claim on your home, such as a dog bit, my neighbor's child, my dog bit my neighbor's child, and they're suing me for $1.5 million. The first $1 million would come from the home policy. The second $1 million would come from the umbrella. Same thing if you have a car accident. In this particular case, they had $500,000. So there's a car accident, somebody's injured, they're in the hospital. They sue you for $1.2 million. The first $500,000 is going to be covered by that underlying policy. The next $1 million is going to be covered by the umbrella. Okay? The reason a lot of companies like to have everything with one is because then you have one company taking care of the whole claim. However, a lot of times for investors, they have multiple properties in multiple states. They may have some carriers, certain states like Texas have Cypress Lloyd's, which is kind of a B, I think it's a B+ rated carrier. And a lot of umbrella companies will only take A or better rated carriers. So you have to look at, if you need an umbrella and you're kind of forced into some of these other policies and you don't have a consistent carrier because you're all over the country and there is no consistent carrier in all the states that you're in, and maybe your autos are with this company and your homes are with this company, you do have options to buy an umbrella that will take, because maybe they don't do underlying carriers. So you can buy an umbrella that is a standalone umbrella, but that what happens is you have to give me, or whoever your agent is, copies of those deck pages so that all of those properties and the car and everything else can be listed on that umbrella. And in that particular case, what happens is your primary carrier carries the first $300,000, $500,000, whatever your coverage is, on that underlying policy, and when they reach the limits, it's then turned over to the umbrella policy. So they will work hand in hand, but sometimes that's your only option. Because somebody did ask me about whether it all had to be with the same carrier, and it does not necessarily have to be with the same carrier. Again, every situation is different, and there may be certain people that it can't be one carrier. And the other thing too is,